Hi, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Her Time to Talk. I'm Meagan Clark, and I'm so excited you're here. As a licensed professional counselor and the founder of Her Time Therapy, a group practice dedicated to supporting women's mental health, creating this podcast has been a dream of mine for a long time. Her Time to Talk is more than just a podcast. It's a space, a community, where women's voices are heard, where our experiences are validated, and where we empower each other to take charge of our mental health in a world that often doesn't make it easy for us to do so. In this inaugural episode, I want to introduce myself, share a bit about my journey, and give you a glimpse into what you can expect from this podcast. Earlier in my professional career, I worked as an English teacher and adjunct professor. This was a career I loved and through which I built a lot of confidence, found an outlet for creativity and a passion for education. But then life threw me one of the hardest challenges I've ever faced. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer. It was July 2013, and I had just graduated with a master's degree in English. I was enrolled and ready to start a PhD program in August, which was a crucial step towards fulfilling my original dream of being an academic and spending my life working in higher education. But in a matter of weeks, everything changed. Faced with the traumatic news that the person I loved the most in the world had been diagnosed with cancer, I made the difficult decision to turn down my doctoral program acceptance. I found a job as a secondary education language arts teacher in Denver, and I applied for a non-traditional teaching license to do that job. I packed up my life and I changed course. What followed was a 3-year journey of caregiving that shaped me in ways I never could have imagined. I became my mom's primary caregiver, spending countless days and hours with her in hospital rooms, chemotherapy clinics, and doctors' offices. I held her hand through procedures, advocated for her care, and navigated the overwhelming and often very unjust and broken medical system. At 24 years old, I eventually had become her medical power of attorney and had to make incredibly difficult decisions, such as enrolling her in hospice care. It was a role that I took on with love and without hesitation, but it was also emotionally and physically exhausting at levels that back then I didn't even understand. All of this was happening while I was starting a new career, a very demanding one, as a teacher in secondary education. During this time, I was also planning my wedding, and I was juggling many stressors that come with being in your early 20s and figuring out your life and who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. It was this experience of being a caregiver while managing so many other responsibilities that was profoundly challenging for me. Yet, it taught me how to manage chronic stress, it taught me about grief and anxiety, and ultimately helped me to find bright spots, even in life's most challenging and darkest times. During all of this, we developed meaningful relationships with my mom's care team, as well as other patients and caregivers that were around us in the clinics and in the hospital spaces. It was these interactions that gave me unique insight. I began to notice something striking. Wherever I looked, whether it was the hospital, the doctor's offices, clinics, a lot of the patients, caregivers, and medical professionals around us were all women. Women truly are the caregivers and the caretakers of the world. And as such, we bear an incredibly heavy burden, and we take it on without hesitation and without issue. Yet the mental health support that's available to us, especially in moments of profound stress and trauma, are often lacking. When my mom and I sought mental health support from her cancer clinic, we were sent to an in-house social worker who essentially was very nice, but handed us forms to fill out for financial and insurance assistance, and that was it. There was really no acknowledgement or treatment offered for the immense levels of grief, trauma, and anxiety that she was experiencing as a patient and I was experiencing as her caregiver and as a person who loved her and was afraid of what was to come and all that was happening under the weight of this kind of diagnosis. That gap in the care system really stayed with me. It fueled my desire to make a difference, not just for myself, but for all the women who find themselves carrying the world on their shoulders without the support that they deserve. As a part of my own grief process, I made the decision to shift my career. After joining a young adult parent loss support group and experiencing how incredibly healing it can be to come into community with others who understand your pain, I decided to embark on a career transition and become a therapist by enrolling in another graduate program, this time focused in school and clinical mental health. I became a mental health counselor to create a space that would provide the kind of care that my mom and I needed, but we didn't receive. I decided as a therapist to focus on women's issues because I saw firsthand how much we carry and how little support is offered to help us manage the weight of it all. My mom passed away on January 8th, 2016. And that was a defining moment in my life, just like her diagnosis was. And it sent me into a long grieving process that years later I'm still in. But I'm starting to see all the stages of grief manifest and cycle through my life. The sixth stage of grief is making meaning out of loss. And for me, that's really what Her Time therapy is all about. It's about turning the pain, the suffering, and the love from that chapter of my life into something that can help others. This may sound like a big deal or a big endeavor, but looking back, I realize now that my mom set the groundwork for Her Time therapy and even for this podcast long ago. My mother was also a business owner, and I had the privilege of watching her open and run a business for years during my childhood. I knew I could do this because she had set the example. Before my mom passed away, she stated to me that my joy was important to her. I know it is important to her, and I spend my life doing something that I love, that I care about and have passion for because of her. She's what motivates me to do this work. This podcast is an extension of that mission and of her, and it's the way to reach even more women, to offer connection, support, and practical tools for healing and thriving. Her Time Therapy and this podcast, Her Time to Talk, are both spaces where women can share their stories and feel seen, supported, and empowered by doing so. As a therapist, I work with women navigating trauma, grief, anxiety, chronic stress, and so much more. Women's issues is a large umbrella with a lot of things that fall under it. I also have a team of incredible women who are clinicians who share my passion for helping women overcome challenges and thrive. Together, we've built a space that prioritizes compassionate, feminist, client-centered care that is tailored to the unique experiences of women. Now, through this podcast, we're expanding that mission to reach even more people. So, what can you expect from Her Time to Talk? Each episode will dive deep into topics that matter to women, from setting boundaries and practicing self-care to healing from the deepest traumas and building resilience in the face of some of the darkest things that life will inevitably bring us. I'll bring you evidence-based tools and strategies that you can use in your everyday life, and we'll explore these topics through a mix of expert interviews, personal stories, and practical advice. But this podcast isn't just about sharing information. It's about connection. And it's about the stories that women have that need to be told, that deserve airtime and to live in the light of the day. It's about breaking down the stigma around mental health and creating a space where you can feel inspired to make positive changes in your life. Whether you're dealing with burnout, navigating a tough relationship, or working through trauma, I hope you'll find encouragement here. And if you're someone who hasn't been able to access therapy or is hesitant to do so, my hope is that this podcast can serve as a bridge, a way for you to start exploring your mental health and learning tools to take care of yourself. I also want this podcast to feel personal because I've been where you are. I've felt the weight of anxiety, the sting of grief, and the uncertainty of navigating life's challenges. But I've also found strength on the other side of those experiences, and I've seen others do the same. I'm here to tell you that you are stronger and more resilient than you might realize. And my goal is to help you uncover that resilience and strength within yourself. Before we wrap up today, I want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for pressing play, for giving yourself the time to explore your mental health, and for choosing to join me on this journey. I'm so excited to share this space with you and to learn and grow together. Our first full episode is coming soon, and it's all about setting compassionate goals in therapy and how to start making resolutions that nurture your well-being instead of adding more pressure to your life. It's a perfect starting point for this podcast, and I can't wait to share it with you. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you're feeling inspired or this has made you reflect or feel something deeper, please leave us a review or share this podcast with someone who you feel might benefit from it. You can also follow us on social media at Her Time to Talk for more updates and mental health tips. And if you're ready to take the next step in your mental health journey, or you would like to be a guest on our podcast, visit hertimetherapy.com and schedule some time to talk with us. Thank you for taking the time to talk today. Remember, your story matters, your voice is powerful, and your mental health is worth prioritizing. Until next time, take care of yourself. This is your time. The information shared on this podcast is not intended to be personal mental health advice, and listening to this podcast does not create a therapeutic relationship between the listener and the therapist featured on this podcast. We encourage listeners to engage with a licensed therapist for personalized mental health treatment and advice.